Hey guys, this is Lucid, and we're going to be doing a video. I'm going to first release this just for Patreons because uh, that was requested by Robert, who's sponsoring this video, so thank you. He told me to just pick some topic that I thought would be fun to cover, and I actually had something on my mind. I was never thinking about making a video about it. But when he asked me to do this, it was the first thing that came to mind, and it just seemed like an obvious, cool thing to do just for Patreon supporters. And I've been thinking, some of it I ended up thinking about during the tournament finals as I was casting it. And you see, some of it just having a god's eye view on a game, it makes you think about things. So, what I was thinking about is how do you think about player development? Like, how good a player is? And it's something I think it's an advantage I have going into some games is I typically know a lot of the players in my games, and a lot of times people don't. You know, a lot of times it's the first time you've played with somebody when you play with them. So one thing is like if you know the players, you kind of know who's good and who's okay, and who's new and all that, and that's certainly useful intel to have. But I was kind of thinking, how do I even think about which player's good? Like, what is it that makes a good player? How do you know if a player's good? It's not even just if they win, right? Because there's all sorts of players who I know who are good who don't necessarily win games. But man, if you go fight them, you're going to be in trouble. And so I'm going to just share with you how I structure some of my thinking about who's good and who's not. And I'm not going to share who's good or who's not. That's not the point of this video. The point of this video is what are the attributes of a good Dominions player? And I've got kind of a structure for levels. And of course, this is completely arbitrary, right? You can be really good and not fit into my levels, or have something from level 2, but you're really a level 1, or, anyway. But hopefully, this is at least a useful framework to get you thinking about your own Dominions game, and to get you maybe thinking about weaknesses in other people's game that you can exploit. So when you first come to Dominions, there's a bajillion units, right? And it's overwhelming. What do I recruit? How do all these stats work? Because you have the stats you can see, and then these stats impact other things, siege strength, precision, magic resistance, age. How do all these things work? The combat rolls, all this stuff's really complicated, right? And then you finally have to look at the spells, and there's more spells than you know what to do with. The game is overwhelming, right? So the first level, right, level 1, is you basically kind of understand the game mechanics. So you can make the game kind of behave how you want it to. You have a basic understanding of some of the important spells. Some spells, kind of what they do. You kind of know how thugs work. You kind of know which units work or how to put them in formations. I mean, it's just level 1 is just you've developed a basic understanding of the game. And that's no trivial feat. Just getting there where you know how the units work and the combat mechanics, it is not trivial, right? So when you're first starting out, you don't know that. Somebody who does know that, when you don't, they're going to whoop you, right? Because they're going to know, okay, well, I understand the combat mechanics, so I'm going to know I'm going to send this unit against you because it's good against the kinds of units you're able to deploy, right? So that's the first level. It's just being able to understand the basic game mechanics, knowing some of the basic spells, and, that is going to enable you to do everything else. It's going to allow you to open up a nation and start making sense of it. It's like learning the alphabet, knowing how to read, right? You're not a literary scholar, but you know how to read, right? So you can open a book. So that's level 1. Level 2 is when you know how to play your nation. And now, on one hand, it's like, okay, well, that's a silly thing to say, because isn't that if you know how to play your nation, you're going to be really good? Why is this only level 2? Well, thing is, knowing how to play a nation means a lot of things. It means you know what the research priorities are for that nation. It means for the magic paths your nation has, you know all the important spells that you should be casting, right, in major combat at different points in the game. It also means that you know all sorts of rating strategies for the nation. Like if you read any of the guides, right, or a good national overview, right, or any of the really good guides on the forums or in all the places you can find them. If you read those guides and it talks about like the soul of a nation, how they play, are they an assassin nation, a raiding nation, huge doomstack nation? What are the cool things they can do? Like being able to execute that, so that when, like, if I were to cast the game and that you were playing, I'd be like, yeah, this is how you, like, this is you win or lose the game. This is a Vanheim player being a Vanheim player, right? Or this is a Lanka player being a Lanka player, or this is a Bandar Log player being a Bandar Log player. Like, you are doing the things that the nation should and could do. So that is a level 2, right? You understand the game mechanics, you have applied them to this nation, and you have figured out a strategy for this nation that is sound. Like, you were playing the nation to its strengths. All right. Getting to level 2, you are going to start winning games. You might not win every game, but when you get level 2, you'll be winning some multiplayer games. Because being able to play a nation well, you'll beat a lot of people, right? Especially if you do that pretty soundly. Yeah. So anyway, that is level 2. Level 3 is you not only know your nation, right? You know the other nations in the game. Now, this is important because you can play your nation well. Like, you do all the things your nation does. But the other side of the equation is, what is everybody else going to be doing? And that's not a simple part of the equation. You need to know their timings. Like, what are the timings this nation sort of hits? Like, what are their research priorities normally? When do certain things kind of come online? When are they stronger or weaker against your nation? These are not necessarily simple things, right? And a lot of this, especially once you get into the higher skill games, you don't have the luxury of throwing away an army. Right, a lot of times if somebody surprises you and they do something, and you saw this in the tournament a few times, but if somebody surprises you and they did something you didn't expect, and that causes them to win a fight against you, a lot of times, if it's a big important fight, that's it. Like, you're done. I mean, you may not roll over and die immediately, but the war is going to spiral out of control, not in your favor. So how do you fight that? You have to anticipate what they're going to do before they have ever even done it once, right? You're going to have to, like, some nations, for example, they're a Foul Vapors nation, right? Like, they're a nation that's capable of it. Now, some nations are capable of it, but it may not be a research priority for them. So, it's like a judgment call. It's an assessment on your part. Do we think how good is their research? When do we think they're going to get there? Is it a priority or not? And you may not know, right? Especially if they haven't ever done it before, much less done it against you. So, that's just one thing. Like, am I going up against the Foul Vapors nation? And I actually made a mistake recently in a game where I attacked somebody really early, and I was thinking I was just going to wallop the crap out of them. And I'm like, they're not a Foul Vapors nation. Well, little did I know they had a Foul Vapors god. And their Foul Vapors god also could summon Foul Vapors mages, and they had been researching a crap ton. And even though I rushed them kind of early, like it was like turn, 18. That's not a rush, but it was early. This nation, which shouldn't have Foul Vapors, had Foul Vapors, and it completely destroyed my huge doom stack I sent at them. So that was a painful lesson. But at least I didn't make the mistake of doing that into a nation that I knew would have Foul Vapors. I got surprised by something that, I don't know, a reasonable person wouldn't expect. But that's that. So anyway, that's level 3. Level 3 is you now know what all the other nations in the game, or especially your neighbors, are capable of, right? What are the sorts of things those nations like to do? When are they a good or bad matchup versus you? picking the right nation to fight, picking a nation which is a favorable matchup for you, is a huge part of winning the war, right? And picking them at the right time. So a lot of times you're good versus one nation early in the game, but you're really bad versus them later. Like astral nations, a lot of them tend to be weaker in the beginning, but very strong later, for example. But anyway, understanding that, or understanding, like sometimes you're good against, you're really bad against massed archers early, but you're good against them later. And blood usually gets pretty strong later. Astral death gets strong later. Understanding which nations are good against which is, it's an advanced thing. You don't need it to win games. You can win games just by doing what your nation does really, really well, right? Because if you're playing against other people who are struggling with that, just doing what you do really well is fine, right? So anyway, that's level 3. Understanding not just your nation, but other people's nations, and the timings and the matchups, and what you need to have researched before you can successfully execute a war against a particular other nation. The fourth level, and this is a tricky one, and it's got a few things in it. But the fourth level is like, okay, so you know all the game mechanics. You know how to play your nation, you know how to play all the other nations, and you know relatively kind of like what their timings tend to be and when it would be a good time to fight each of them. Okay. The fourth thing is tricks. And there's 2 parts to the fourth thing, and I don't really know the right way to break them out. But the fourth part is tricks. So like what are the things you are going to do that are not going to be expected, right? That somebody has never seen before, that people didn't know you would do. So like with Ulm, which the nation I have pulled up here, there's all sorts. You have these. You can use these guys as thugs. People may not do that. You could have innovative gear sets to put on these guys. You can fluff them. You can have these guys fluff any kind of summons, because these are reasonably cheap and they can do Iron Warriors on any kind of summon. So think of some cool summon you can get, like ghosts, right? So you could have like ghosts on your pretender and having them getting fluffed with Iron Warriors and getting let into... I mean, I'm not exactly sure. This is just like blah coming out of my head, right? But like thugged out Black Lords is a thing, and those guys are actually pretty cool. But people do kind of expect that. That's kind of an Ulm thing. But like in the tournament finals, you saw these fluffed up gelatinous cubes, which was pretty cool. And so that was like a trick. That's not necessarily something you're expecting to see when you fight Yiss. That is not in the normal Yiss playbook. It's something that Yiss can do. Gelatinous cubes are good. You sometimes see them in games. It's a thing, right? But it's not something you expect, right? It's a trick. So sometimes you have like one trick, right? Like, okay, I'm Ulm. I know a certain set of gear to put on them, and I know how to fluff them with a Mastersmith. Okay, that's a trick. It is a trick. Having Black Lord thugs that you fluff with Mastersmiths and having a cool gear combo is a trick. But it's only one trick, right? And you show your one trick, and then people are like, oh, this is the trick he's going to use. And then they put the counter out to that trick. Now, Ulm is not a nation with a lot of tricks. They have some tricks. It's not a nation with a lot of tricks. But your gods can also be an enabler for tricks, right? And then indie mages and indies you find can be enablers for tricks. So as you get to be a better player, as you have fought more, like the more better players you play against, the more of these tricks you start seeing. And you write them down in your dirty black book of tricks. And when you end up getting a lot of tricks, when you have a lot of little crafty, efficient, economical things you can do that are difficult to predict and expect, you end up getting a pretty strong advantage, because how are people going to know what trick they have to counter and when? And if you keep throwing different tricks at them, well, it's going to be hard for them to deal with. And a lot of times, sometimes tricks are not a big deal. Sometimes I have a little trick it's just some little low cost way to raid you. And okay. But sometimes the trick is a way to kill your whole army, right? So the tricks sometimes are like, sort of low impact but cheap in budget. But sometimes the tricks are like, you just lost the game from this little trick I had. So developing a deep bag of tricks. In fact, when I have, I might, let me see if I can show it to you. Well, I think the way I have my recording software set up. When I have like a spreadsheet I'll do on some of the nations as I'm preparing to do a national overview. Or, even if I'm not doing a national overview form, if I'm just like thinking about a nation, sometimes I have a spreadsheet I fill out, and I'll put like what the path access is for various nation, for the mages, so I can think about what I want on my god and what kinds of things I want on my bless. But I have a section for tricks. And some nations I can't come up with many tricks, but some nations I've got, like 10 tricks. And coming up with tricks for nations is an important part of getting to kind of level 4. I mean, you can argue that some of the tricks are like just playing your nation well, but a lot of the tricks also transition. It's not a thing for one nation. Like a lot of the tricks, like imagine you have, as you play Dominions, you play lots of different nations, you learn lots of different things. You develop this long list of tricks. Like let's say you've got 40. When you pick up a new nation, all 40 of them are not going to be applicable to that nation. But maybe 15 or 20 of them are, right? And some more of them could become applicable if you find the right indie. So anyway, that's part of level 4 is having a deep bag of tricks. Now, you can have a deep bag of tricks and also not be good at playing other nations, but the people who have really good bags of tricks, they tend to actually have level 3 too, like where they also understand how all the other nations play. The other category of level 4, and you could argue this is like level 5, but we'll put it in there with level 4, is when the game starts becoming a chessboard. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. What I mean by that is a lot of times you look at a turn and you're like, okay, here's the situation. How do I react to it? Where do I put my armies? How do I script them? And it's very much one turn deep. Like you're anticipating what your opponent's going to do this turn, and you're trying to have a good outcome so that once you get the next turn back, it's a good turn, right? At some level, the game starts becoming a chessboard, right? Where you're not even thinking, you're thinking not just about what is the move you're going to do so that the game state for next turn is good, but you're also thinking about how you're forcing your opponent to move their pieces around on the board so it sets you up for a better move you can make next turn. Anyway, or how are you going, and that plays into diplomacy too, and timing wars and things like that. So as you get a better understanding of diplomacy, and like at some point the armies are scripted right. Like you've got your army scripted right, you've got your thugs scripting right, and there's kind of like a background noise of just like, okay, yeah, of course we're going to be raiding and counter raiding, of course, right? And of course my army is going to be scripted to do all the cool stuff it can do, of course. And the game becomes about positioning and where things are. And so anyway, that's kind of like the final level, I think. That combined with the bag of tricks, that's what's going to, the people who play the strategic map well, right, who put the right things in the right spots, who draw people into the right wars, who don't overcommit, like doing the strategic level map stuff well, I think is the other kind of final differentiator for really good players that I've noticed. And when I play against a player that's better than me, the two things, because I think I'm kind of like a level 3, like I think I have a pretty good understanding of the nations and the matchups, but I do not have the deepest bag of tricks out there, and I do not think strategically necessarily like a chessboard the best out there. And I make mistakes and all sorts. I'm also, like make a fair amount of mistakes too. So when I play against a player that's better than me, what I typically notice is like I can feel that they're like beating me at the strategic level of the map, like how they're moving things around. That's just kind of like a feeling I get. And then I also typically feel like the bag of tricks they have is better than mine. You know, deeper, more well thought out, all those things. So, anyway, I hope that's a useful framework for maybe for you to think about your own game, wherever you are. You know, how to maybe make an improvement. Yeah, one thing, if you're at a level, so if you're working on just being a level 1 where you just want to understand like the game better, there's no real solution to that other than playing and asking questions and reading forums and guides, right? If you want to get to level 2 where you understand your nation well, you just go out and read the guides for your nation, right? And really try to internalize them. If you want to be level 2, I'd recommend going out and reading guides for all the nations of the nations in your game. That's like a good starting point. Now, reading a guide for the nation is one thing, but you actually kind of have to play it once. So to get really good with a nation, you need to probably play it at least twice. And a lot of the things in the guide will start making more sense once you've already played the nation once. The same thing honestly goes for getting level 2. It's one thing to have read a guide like, okay, I've got these nations in my game. I don't know Agartha very well. Let's read about them, right? So you go read a guide on Agartha and it tells you a bunch of stuff. If you're really smart, you can figure that out, right? And you can really internalize what it's going to mean to fight them by reading the guide. A lot of times, you actually have to experience it. You have to have either watched an Agartha fight, or you have to have fought Agartha, or you have to have played as Agartha, you know? So, and the other thing too is like if you're playing against like people, like let's say I'm playing against an Agartha player here, but they, you know, let's say they don't have a super great grasp of Agartha. Like they don't play the quintessential Agartha. They're not doing all the things Agartha should do. I may not learn the lesson I need to learn about Agartha from that game. And I can definitely think of like each nation. I think this is for every player. Each nation you have, once you've played a lot of games, you will have some player in mind who has played it really, really well. And the next time you see that nation in a game and you're worried about them, like let's say they're starting to get kind of big, it brings to mind all basically the horror that this one other player, you know, manifested when they played them correctly. So anyway, you can read a guide to get a sense of like what the other nations in your game are going to be like, but a lot of times you actually have to see them in practice and kind of watch the horror for yourself. So anyway, that is how to maybe get to level 3, which is where you have, you know all the nations in your game. And then level 4, you can watch videos and stuff or read forums where people are talking about tips and tricks. But honestly, the best way to learn to learn tricks is to get your ass kicked by them. That's how I've learned. I mean, there's some I've theory crafted on my own, or like I heard on the forum, I was like, I can't be as good as they're saying it is. And I go test it. I'm like, oh shit, that's really good. But, and you can theory craft your way into coming up with your own tricks for sure. And that's like super fun. And if you do that, then nobody else knows about it because you may be the original inventor. But yeah, I can tell you, hey, golem, horror harmonica golems are like kind of nasty. And you're like, oh, okay. I mean, in reality, everybody I think who's made a horror harmonica golem has seen a horror harmonica golem before, right? Like, I think very few people even read about it. Like, or sure they, like you read about it, but you really see it. Like somebody's done it in a game, and then once you've had your ass kicked by a horror harmonica golem, you're like, well, I'm gonna build that in my next game. Anyway, that's a trick. So having like a deep bag of tricks, or like the Phoenix Pyre Golem, or there's a bajillion tricks, like the Moss Body High Protection dude, right? Or you name it. The Phoenix Pyre Bakemono Sorcerers, right? Once you've seen the tricks, you add it to your little trick list, and that's one of the ones, and that's what takes a really good player. Is there's not many people. I mean, there's some people who there's a lot of good players, right? But the number of players who know, like, who are at least level 3, and then they have super deep bags of tricks, and they are doing like the chess thing, the strategy level thing on the map. And they're good at Diplo, like that. Those number of players are pretty few. There's not a lot of them. And when one of them's in your game, you're like, fuck, I'm gonna lose this game. That's how I feel when one of them jumps in my game. Anyway, I hope you found this useful. At least when I first release this video, it's going to be unlisted. I may open it up to the public, but as it's unlisted, feel free to share it with anyone you want to. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Take care.